But I'll tell you what we were back in 2008, 2009. We were gritty and we were talented to a point, but man, we wanted to win. And we took the field with a swagger every day. Like I didn't care if John Parker Wilson threw the ball one freaking time. I didn't care if he threw the ball one time because I knew that if I used my defensive lineman and we used his body to block a linebacker, then we had good enough tailbacks to be able to get it done behind us and go the distance. So it was just an attitude. It was a swagger back then. And even building up to this day, you can tell the great Alabama teams have had that swagger on the offensive line.
So in your head, run the damn ball, right?
Run the damn ball. Man, I used to have a T-shirt with that written across it. Run the damn ball. I can't tell you how many times in the last, let's call it 10, 12 years being out of that program that I've yelled at the TV and go, run the ball.
Beat Everyone is brought to you by Broadway Joe's Fantasy Sports, inspired by football legend Joe Namath. Embrace the thrill of daily fantasy sports like never before in a new app coming soon. Welcome to Beat Everyone. I am Ben Flanagan, and today we're going to get in the trenches of Alabama football. And to help us do that, we have a very special guest, one of the greatest offensive linemen to ever play for the Crimson Tide, first-team All-SEC, first-team consensus All-American, BCS national champion, helping Alabama to win their first title in 17 years in what is considered the rebirth of the Alabama football dynasty. You can see him on AL.com's head-to-head this season, former Alabama and Atlanta Falcons offensive lineman. Mike Johnson, thank you for joining us, man.
I'm happy to be here, man. It's been a lot of fun to talk about this Alabama program with Simone on the head-to-head stuff, and obviously any chance I get to rehash some of the memories that was, 15 years ago, I'll jump on that any chance I get.
Hey, man, it feels like yesterday for a lot of us, and I'm sure a lot of you guys who were actually in the trenches, like I said. And I want to start with offensive line and kind of focus on offensive line. You're obviously an expert, one of the best to ever do it at Alabama. Offensive line, I think, is probably the most misunderstood aspect of the sport when it comes to casual fans like me, right? Like you always hear games are won in the trenches. So let's keep it simple here. On that side of the ball, Mike, why is offensive line so critical in the success of a team?
It's the we always used to Joe Pendry, when he was our offensive line coach at Alabama, he used to break it down in bits of a car, right? Basically, the offensive line's the engine. You know, you have some guys that are the paint job, you have the tires, the steering wheel, whatever else you might need, but the car doesn't go anywhere unless it has a good engine, right? And so we used to take pride in that. Listen, it comes down to selflessness, in my opinion. I tell people all the time that I don't honestly look at offensive line as a position. I think it's more of a personality trait. I know that sounds ridiculous when people hear that. I'm like, I don't think you just simply play offensive line. I think you were just born an offensive lineman. I think it's just something that is inside of you, that, you are willing to kind of take a step back, be selfless, help the team be successful. And kind of go about it that way. And I think it just takes a certain personality trait to make that happen. But to your original question, I think that there's so many different things. I mean, you look at an offense, there's 11 guys on the field, 5 of them are offensive linemen at all times, right? No matter what you want to do. So those guys have to do their job. And not only that, they have to be cohesive as a unit. And when you have that cohesion, I got to tell you, it's a beautiful thing. It brings a tear to my eye anytime you see a good offensive line take the field, much like we did last weekend against Wisconsin.
Yeah, and Mike, I thought it was funny when Saban was coach, and in a post-game press conference, like somebody would ask him, what do you think of how the offensive line played? And his go-to answer was always, look, I'm watching the ball. I'm going to have to look at the film later to see exactly how they played. So you're in it. You were there. So when you were playing and now when you're watching, what are the things that you're looking for with an offensive line during a game that might indicate to you how the game might go?
Well, for us, it was a little bit different because the game of football has changed so much over the last 15 years, right? But for us, it was always penetration, number one. We did not, everything we did was based on not allowing penetration, to where you want to put your ear, to where you want to put your face, to where you want to sink your hands, and to where you expect gap integrity to come from the defense. That's the one alarm bell that'll go off if I'm watching a team with bad offensive line play, is how easily they allow guys to get into the backfield, right? And that's in the run game and the pass game. The The next thing is, can they get movement? Can you get movement north and south? Now, teams are built differently. There's some teams that run wide zone that'll stretch you east to west. There's some teams that have big guys up front. Wisconsin's one of those last week that can get vertical movement. Can they do a little bit of everything? I think that's when you see the great teams, right? You see the gap scheme where you have the pulling guards that'll get outside, that'll get inside. You'll see the wide zone cutbacks. You'll see the inside zone. So that's what I look for. I look for diversity in style of play. How many different things can you do? And I look for penetration in the backfield, man. You never want a guy wearing the opposing team's jersey to be in your team's backfield. It never ends up being a good thing if that happens too many times in a game. And so that's kind of how I go about watching it. I watch football differently than almost anybody, right? Just because that's the first thing that I'm watching. Box counts, angles, and where the offensive line's kind of calls are going throughout the play.
Yeah, I want to ask you about some of your old teammates at Alabama, and specifically a guy who used to give you and your unit a lot of credit in real time. You blocked for some amazing players in your time at Alabama, including obviously the 2009 season, the eventual Heisman winner, Mark Ingram. And, behind him were Trent Richardson and Roy Upchurch. I mean, those guys were beasts too. But what was it like creating opportunities for a guy who would raise arguably the most prestigious trophy in all of sports? And at what point did you and your teammates realize, hey, this guy might win a Heisman and we play a big role in making that happen?
It's pretty surreal, right? I mean, I still go back to, December of 2009, and it feels like you're floating on a cloud. It's not even to get into what life was like in January of 2010 playing Texas and on down the road and everything that else went into my personal life, like the draft and, Senior Bowl and the Combine and everything else. You go back to December 2009, what a surreal feeling. First of all, to face off with Florida in the SEC title game, the rematch where we finally were able to win that game, and you beat Tim Tebow, who was just an absolute legend in his own right. And then to kind of move on from that, I think the very next day we went through our football banquet, and I distinctly remember this because, and I think the trophy is actually sitting right behind me right now. The offensive player of the year comes out, and it's me and Mark Ingram for that 2009 team. And I sat back down, and somebody said, "Man, how does it feel to win an award along with the guy that's probably going to win the Heisman Trophy?" And I think at that moment I was like, oh my gosh, like he's going to win the Heisman Trophy. And it wasn't a landslide. And you go back and look at what that season was, it just kind of echoes how important he was to that team. But he was an absolute pleasure, man. From the time that Mark, and really that entire 2008 signing class that was Julio and, Marcel Darius and Terrence Cody coming from JUCO, from the time all those guys stepped on campus, they were an absolute pleasure. Dante Hightower. But Mark is just one of my favorite guys. I see him still from time to time. Got to match up with him when I was with the Falcons and he was with the Saints. But just a great, great dude, man. Absolutely love blocking for him. And he was always willing to turn around and give the credit to the big fellas behind him.
A competitive NFC South in those days, to say the least. And listen, as Saban and the coaching staff installed their systems in all three phases, once they sort of helped make that transition, and Alabama really started to sort of change and form into what we knew it to become during these Saban dynasty years, one of the biggest differences was the talent level on the entire roster, and chiefly up front. So what was it about the size, the strength, the physicality, the agility? What was it about all that? And what was it like to compete with it every day in those Nick Saban practices that we always hear about?
What's funny is I got a chance to go to the Saban Field commemoration a couple of weeks ago when they played South Florida. And I went with a good buddy of mine, Drew Davis, who was our starting right tackle for 2 years in 08 and 09. And, Wilkin Formby was having a tough time at right tackle during that game. I played right tackle as a sophomore. I was not incredibly good at it before I moved to guard, and then Drew played the following 2 years, and we're kind of looking at each other during that South Florida game and going, I know that everybody's upset with him, but trust me, nobody's more upset than he is. It's just, there's so much pressure on a position like that, right? And there's so much of a different dynamic nowadays. Drew and I kind of laughed at each other, looking at some of the players they have, the Tyler Bookers of the world and Caden Proctor, and I'm like, there's no way that we would have been able to play on some of these teams. Multi-year starters back for national championship teams, the game has changed so much. Talked to Jeff Allen about the same things. You look at guys like Evan Neal and some of the other players that have come through, just unbelievable. But I'll tell you what we were back in 2008, 2009. We were gritty and we were talented to a point, but man, we wanted to win. right? And you look at Andre Smith. I had the absolute pleasure of playing between Andre Smith and Antoine Caldwell, two All-Americans in their own right in 2008. And we took the field with a swagger every day. Like I didn't care if John Parker Wilson threw the ball one freaking time. I didn't care if he threw the ball one time because I knew that if I used my defensive lineman and we used his body to block a linebacker, that we had good enough tailbacks to be able to get it done behind us and go the distance. So it was just an attitude. It was a swagger back then. And even building up to this day, you can tell the great Alabama teams have had that swagger on their offensive line.
So in your head, run the damn ball, right?
Run the damn ball, man. I used to have a T-shirt with that written across it. Run the damn ball. I can't tell you how many times in the last, let's call it 10, 12 years being out of that program that I've yelled at the TV and go, run the ball. I love it.
True Alabama fan and player. You had already finished your career in Tuscaloosa, but ESPN came in 2010 to film the Alabama team for the Training Day series, and fans got to see Greg McElroy in a sequence take the offensive line out to dinner at like Baumhauer's. I wonder, like, I just think about, is that something quarterbacks really do? Do they take y'all out for a meal, get y'all gifts as a way to say thanks for protecting our butts out there?
Yeah, I remember Greg doing that in 2009 as well. We went to Baumhauer's. Unfortunately, and I don't know if this was planned or not, we actually showed up on a day they were doing Hey Coach there. That was not good planning by anybody, man. We didn't get really a moment to ourselves the entire time. We were sitting there going, that was a bad idea. But yeah, I definitely remember Greg being able to do that. And, moving into being around Matt Ryan in my NFL career, man, he always took great care. I mean, there was custom boots one year. There was, back when drones were like $1,000, he bought every offensive lineman a drone or whatever else. Always good gifts. And I had the pleasure of being around some pretty good ones. I was with John Parker Wilson in Alabama and in Atlanta for his stint there. I think he was there with me for 3 years. And those guys always kind of understood, man, what it takes and what you do and put on the line for those quarterbacks behind them. So I always appreciated it, man. Like I said, I think being an offensive lineman is kind of a personality trait. But the mark of a good quarterback is taking care of those big fellas up front.
Mike, you mentioned Welcome Formby, Caden Proctor, Alabama's offensive line. They've been through quite a journey this season, and we saw them struggle in the first couple of games, but they've really been dominant since bringing Elijah Pritchett in at right tackle near the end of the South Florida game, and we obviously saw the return of Caden Proctor against Wisconsin. What have you learned from watching this Alabama offensive line so far?
Well, first of all, I think Elijah Pritchett's a great player. Hopefully both he and Caden Proctor can be on the mend and stay at full health throughout the season, because I think they are paramount. I think those guys, their health is imperative to what Alabama is able to do offensively. You kind of add that to the fact that Welcome Formby, I still think Welcome Formby is going to be a great player when it's all said and done in Alabama. But you looked at kind of the inability to even help him in some of those situations against South Florida, and it made it all the more important that those guys are healthy. I'll tell you what's really stood out to me, aside from Tyler Booker, now he's kind of on a level of his own with this Alabama offensive line. Parker Brailsford is playing with a nastiness that I'm not sure I understood he had. And I'm not saying he didn't have it at Washington, but I didn't watch Washington terribly closely last year with that Joe Moore award-winning offensive line. But Parker Brailsford, being able to watch him, it's like he somehow got angrier when he got to Tuscaloosa and kind of took on that acumen that some of these Alabama offensive lines have played with. I absolutely love it. I love him cleaning out the pocket, clearing guys out when they're engaged with guards and taking shots at every chance you get a rib sandwich and move those guys out of the way. So I love the nastiness this group has tried to play with when they've been full strength. I think that when you have all five of them healthy and in the right spots, I don't know if there's a better group in the country. They've been pretty fun to watch.
So anger is something that you need when you play that position.
Only at the right times. Only at the right times. Coach Saban would lose his mind if he heard me say you have to be angry. It's a controlled chaos. It's controlled chaos.
I got you. Hey, let's talk about Alabama, Georgia. This is a rivalry that you've gotten experience with firsthand. And before we dig into your experience specifically, we did get news this week that Georgia is going to be without Tate Ratledge, the 3-year starter at guard, highly regarded player. What are your thoughts on this game when it comes to the battle in the line of scrimmage?
Well, I'm very familiar with Tate Ratledge over here. Actually, I remember coaching against him when he was with the Darlington School over here in the north end of Georgia. Man, he is an unbelievable player, and to kind of encapsulate what he means, it's every bit of what Tyler Booker is to Alabama's offensive line. I mean, this is probably a day one starter in the NFL and a guy that's played a ton of football. I think he's actually the longest in the tooth when it comes to Georgia's team. I think that's a real stat. He's been there longer than anybody, and has played at a very high level. So that's obviously a huge ding for them. I do think they have quality players behind them. The problem is that past those first 5 that will be playing at Alabama next Saturday, I don't think there's very much, right? I think that you kind of falling off a cliff once you get past the depth that'll be playing for them. So it's going to be a battle. Look, and I think that the thing is getting a taste of what Alabama is against Georgia in the post-Saban era. You know, Coach Saban had so much success against Kirby Smart and really Georgia in general over the last decade plus, because that brand of football kind of suited what he was trying to do. He loved physical football games. He loved teams that were strong in the trenches. Go back to, the Leonard Fournette style teams at LSU. He loved playing in a sandbox like that. So I think understanding the physicality that Bama needs to play with in the post-Saban era under Kalen DeBoer, I think we're going to learn a lot about that. And hopefully Alabama's defensive line's up to the task. They have been so far. Really impressed with what they've been doing in the front 7 so far. And I think they'll be ready to go when Georgia's offensive line comes to town.
Mike, I want to talk a little bit more about your career. You played in arguably one of the most important games in modern Alabama football history, the 2008 game between Alabama and Georgia in Athens, which is best known to fans as the Blackout game. And there's so much lore, mythology, stories about this game. But to sort of start us off on this look back, can you just sort of tell us when exactly you knew that you were going to beat the ever-loving hell out of Georgia that night?
Not till the clock hit 0, man. That was a dominant game, but it was more of like a dominant half. Georgia came storming back. They had too much talent not to. I mean, you look at all the players they had that went on to have NFL careers, even defensively. I mean, Rennie Curran, Akeem Dent. I was teammates with Akeem Dent in Atlanta with the Falcons. Jeff Owens, a defensive lineman who had a good career. Offensively, obviously, you talk about Matt Stafford and Noshawn and everybody else that was a part of that team. It was pretty crazy to watch, but the answer is I don't know. I don't remember ever really coming up for air in the middle of those games. It was never, man, we're beating the crap out of this team or anything like that. It was, you go back to the first game of the year in 2008, it was against Clemson, and we were kind of like waiting for the other shoe to drop because we had so many tough times the previous 2 years. It was like, man, we really got to keep going or they're going to come back on us at any minute. Felt the same way about Georgia, and they ended up making a run at it in the second half. It wasn't as out of hand as it probably should have been, but I knew that game was a big deal, and everybody makes a big deal about Scott Cochran's comments. I didn't understand, I think, at the time he made those comments, what a big game it was until the fallout from those comments and everything that was going on after that and being played on SportsCenter. And you're like, wow, this actually is a big game. Georgia was preseason #1, and obviously we had kind of bursted onto the scene with, really dealing with business the first couple of games that year. So to answer your question, I didn't know at any point until clock hit 0 that we would beat them handily. And thankfully, they weren't able to really complete the comeback, and we kind of put the foot down at the end.
Yeah, the hole was just too big. I mean, it's 31-0 in the first half, like you mentioned, but Georgia did make it interesting. Like you said, so much talent on that team with a future first overall pick in Matt Stafford. And but you guys, y'all took care of business in the second half, played really disciplined football and got an impressive win. And you mentioned Scott Cochran as a follow-up there. What about Scott Cochran and the role he played, not just as the strength coach on the team, but as the motivator, like a primary motivator to the team and what y'all built into a championship program? What do you remember about Scott Cochran?
I think the one thing that gets overlooked a lot of times, Ben, is when you look at college programs, really any program in general, it's the energy, it's the buzz. And it's really like that in any job, right? You show up, and especially in a job where you have to affect other people in a positive manner, having that energy every day is imperative. And, we weren't the kind of program that was going to have a DJ at practice and, have people like Tuscaloosa summers are hot. You know what I mean? Being a football player at Alabama it sucks sometimes. And I think to have Scott Cochran, I remember the day he was hired like it was yesterday, because we were still dealing with all this, all this turnover. And Rocky Colburn had been our strength coach. He had come over from actually the Atlanta Falcons, and he had been around the program for the previous year. And then all of a sudden this guy comes in who's, high 20, maybe 28, 29. I don't remember what he was at the time. And he's just screaming. And we were like, who is this dude? Like, I don't need to be screamed at right now, bro. Like, it's just a random Tuesday morning. I don't want you to come in here yelling at me. But he was, we talked about the offensive line and about parts of a car. I mean, he was the battery. He was the energy that surrounded that program for so many years. I'm so thankful for him. I still talk to him a pretty good bit, as do a lot of the players that I played with. And the effect that he had, not just on our football careers, but just on our personalities throughout the year, of understanding what was being asked of us on a daily basis as men, just to bring the energy and affect people in a positive light around us. And I go back to my time there, and it's simply, Coach Saban aside, it's Joe Pendry and it's Scott Cochran. I mean, I can't tell you, I've picked up the phone and called him numerous times over the years and caught up with him, man. He just had a massive impact on myself and everybody else that ever had a chance to be around him and be around that program.
Mike, just a couple more questions on that Georgia game, since this is Georgia week. What was the crowd like in Athens? Like, they've got this reputation as one of the most hostile home crowds in the SEC. I mean, they wear the spiky Road Warrior shoulder pads. They dress up like the Joker. They bark at you. Despite the result and how y'all were able to come in and open up a can in Athens, I mean, the Blackout was a cool atmosphere. I'll admit, I was watching it on TV. I wasn't there. But what did y'all think when you were on the field and on the sideline?
Well, they were definitely out for blood that night. There's no doubt about it. I mean, I remember coming out of the tunnel, and I think their away locker room was pretty small from what I remember, to the point that I don't even know if we could fit the whole coaching staff in there in pregame. It's just, you kind of have these memories of away stadiums, especially the ones from the East that you didn't play more than once, in the SEC East back then. I remember it being very small, but I remember feeling like you felt like the stadium was going to collapse at one point, and then walking out in that tunnel in the corner, and everybody leaned over the rail talking trash to you about, you're this, you're that, you're this. And I do remember the quiet and the calm that kind of fell over that group in the middle of the second quarter when we started scoring and it seemed like the game was getting out of hand. Walking back through that tunnel before halftime and really them not wanting to say anything. It was one of the most satisfying feelings you could probably ever have as a football player. And you don't get many of those in those hostile environments. So they were awesome, man. Honestly, it's a great rivalry, and I know there is some hatred between Georgia and Alabama fans, but I think their fan base is very much, in my opinion, like Alabama's fans. I mean, you don't ever hear these, top 3 list of loudest stadiums or whatever, and usually Georgia and Alabama kind of take a back seat to Death Valley and some of the other places, the Swamp and these places with these nicknames. It just seems like Alabama and Georgia fans are there, and they're there for business. It's what can we do to affect the away team and take something away from them and affect their calls and everything else. So I do remember a calm that fell over that place where they were kind of just gasping for air, like, what is going on right now? We had the preseason #1 team, and yet we are getting throttled.
Yeah, it seems like that would be a satisfying feeling for players. We even saw it on, I think it was a social media post from this past weekend. Some of the Alabama players are walking off the field after the Wisconsin win, and they're looking around and saying, where'd everybody go? The stadium had emptied, and they were enjoying that, to say the least. And Mike, last thing on this game, this was 4 weeks after the season opener against Clemson, and there was obviously an air of something new with Alabama. But to a lot of fans, that Georgia game really felt like a turning point in the history of the program. Did it feel like that in the locker room?
I think it did. I think each step we took that year, there was a lot of kind of monkeys to get off your back at certain points. And you beat Clemson, but then you're like, okay, maybe Clemson's not very good, right? And then I think we maybe beat Arkansas or somebody else right around the Georgia game. It's like, I don't know how good Arkansas is. Maybe we should have throttled Arkansas. And you're still kind of using all these measuring sticks at that time. I think Alabama fans that remember that season well kind of go along that trail with me. As you walk down the schedule, it's like, how good are we? But, we also had a game, and I actually referenced this after the South Florida game. We had a game against Tulane after Clemson where we did not play well at all. I had to play left tackle. Andre was out. It looked a lot like the South Florida game a couple of weeks ago. So I don't think we understood how good we could be. We didn't really know at that point what Julio was or would come to be. We didn't really know what Mark Ingram was or what he would come to be. So it was still a lot of digging going on. We were just all kind of pushing in the same direction. But, that was just another measuring stick along the way. In the end, we actually learned a lot of lessons about letting off the throttle in the second half and allowing those other teams, the talented teams, back into games that I think we carried throughout not only that season, but the next year as well.
Yeah, I can't remember. I'm not looking at it right now, but that you mentioned that Tulane game, and I think y'all won like 20-6 or something like that. So
Uh,
yeah, it was one of those sort of like ugly games. But look, I mean, even with South Florida the past couple of years, as a fan watching, I like those ugly games because I mean, you tell me you're there, but like it just seems like there are opportunities to learn sort of like where you are and where you need to improve. And as long as you get out of there with a win and something to work on, then it's probably a positive.
it's definitely a positive. And listen, you go back far enough. I was there for the Louisiana Monroe game as well. I hate to bring that up on a podcast like this, but look, I went through those games when it ended in a loss, and I played. You know, I was there for the Southern Miss Pro Throw game where Southern Miss easily could have won that game. Houston, I think we played Houston maybe '06 or '07, and we won by a touchdown. Duke, I think we won by 6 points against Duke. So when you can come out of those games, any game with a victory, it is huge. But when you do have title aspirations, it's even that much bigger because I think that just presses you forward, kind of gives you that poster to be able to put on your locker of, man, that was a close one. And then you look at your grade, you didn't play very well. And it kind of is, it's a slap in the face. It's a reality check to what's necessary to be able to pull this team to victory.
Mike, when we have the opportunity to talk to an Alabama football great, we like to go through a bit of a lightning round of questions. So we're going to kick this off with hate is a strong word, I understand, but we're having a little fun here. It's a lightning round. When you were playing, what SEC team did you hate the most?
Whoa. I know this is lightning round. Let me think. Let me just make my check marks here. I mean, it was definitely Auburn. There's no doubt about it. I mean, I know there's some old school Alabama fans that say Tennessee or new school Alabama fans that say LSU. It was just Auburn. Let's not overcomplicate this. I hated everything about them. I hated their stadium, hated their colors, hated most of their players. It's Auburn.
Good answer. Okay, next one. This is going to be a tough one. Favorite Alabama teammate?
Oh, gosh, that's a tough one. I'll give you a tie. How about Antoine Caldwell? It's our captain in '08. I still, every time I see him to this day, one of my favorite people. And Roy Upchurch. Roy Upchurch and I spent a lot of time together. We're both from Florida. Both came through the program about the same time. To see where he was at is his depths and at his height, catching the game-winning touchdown. He's also a head coach in high school football now. Got to see him last weekend. Just two of my favorite people ever.
Awesome. Roy Upchurch, underrated as an Alabama running back. Whenever that guy touched the ball, it seemed like something special happened.
There's nobody like irrelevant Roy. I can just tell you that.
Well, so people don't think of offensive linemen as in on individual plays, right? Like you may notice a block here and there or whatever, but you see the run and you're not thinking about the block that opened up the hole for the long run. But what was your favorite play that you were involved in?
This is a great question. I'm glad you asked this because this is every offensive lineman's dream, right? When we played in the national title game, I was playing between James Carpenter and William Vallejos. I saw a blitz look that I had seen on film where they kind of overload the weak side of the play, and I recognized it immediately, and I kind of tapped James Carpenter, and I was like, hey, here comes that stunt. I was like, it was Sam Acho playing in a 4 technique in front of James Carpenter. I was like, he's going to pinch. I was like, here it comes right here. Just pick up the blitzer. Here it comes, and I kept tapping him. I picked up Sam Acho pinching. I pancaked him. James picked up the backer, and Trent Richardson scored from about 40 or 50 yards out in Pasadena. And not only did that end in me being on a Daniel Moore painting with that on it, but also, and this is the most important, Kirk Herbstreit came back from commercial break and put a circle and said, watch Mike Johnson at left guard here. And I just got to tell y'all, as an offensive lineman, there is nothing better than having them circle you and say, watch this guy go to work, especially in a national title game. So that was an absolute highlight of my career. I will admit that.
Amazing. One of the cleanest 50-yard runs you'll ever see. Trent Richardson absolutely untouched on that play.
I saw that blitz in my sleep. I knew it was a Will Muschamp blitz. I tapped James. There's actually a picture. I'm tapping James going, hey, here it comes. Watch this. Here it comes. And, I mean, it parted like the Red Sea. Beautiful.
What's the worst Nick Saban ever chewed you out?
That's a good question, too. So we used to do this drill, team run, ones versus ones. We had a spectacular front seven: Terrence Cody, Rolando McClain, Dante Hightower, Marcel Darius. You know all the names. Upshaw. And we had a day, because we had a Heisman Trophy winning tailback, we had a day where we went out and gashed them. I mean, like 30 yards here, 50 yards here, 60 yards. There's only supposed to be 4 plays. 4 plays in, we gashed them so hard that Nick Saban started the drill over. And I yelled at the top of my lungs, not looking in his direction, that in more or less words, that this was not a defensive drill, that this is a team drill. And why are we being punished for doing well in a team drill? He didn't like that very much. Uh, I actually talked to offensive line coach Joe Pendry years later about this when he was the Birmingham Iron general manager back in like 2018, 2019. And he brought this story up because he said that he told Nick, because Nick looked at him and said, aren't you going to say something to him? And he said he looked at Coach Saban and he said, I agree with him. It's not a defensive drill. But it still didn't stop Coach Saban from absolutely undressing me in the moment, saying, don't you dare raise your voice. This is not about you. It's about the team getting better. And that I took it on the chin that day. I apologized to him later, and he admitted that it probably wasn't the best to start the drill over. And I don't think we restarted that drill the rest of the season in 2009. But nonetheless, I got absolutely I felt about that tall at that moment. It was a brutal one. I'll just tell you that.
The wrath of Nick Saban. What's the best game you ever played in, or your favorite game you ever played in?
It was the Florida game in 2009 because it felt like that was the cherry on top. In a lot of ways, that felt like a national title game. 1 versus 2. It was a rematch the year before. It was Tim Tebow and everything else that was that dynasty. That game was the passing of the torch from one dynasty to the next. They had won 2 of the last 3 national titles. Bama would go on to win 3 of the next 4 national titles after that game. Everything that was involved in that, and really us just coming together with probably a less talented team at the time and just thumping an elite Florida team. I'll never forget it as long as I live. I still put it above the Texas game to this day just because of everything that went into it.
Yeah, that's one of those games where you just can't comprehend the level of talent that is on the field at the same time. Toughest guy you ever had to block at practice?
That's Terrence Cody. Marcel Darius is a very close second, though. And I actually, what's funny about that Florida game, I ran into Pouncey. I can't remember which one of it was that came out in 2009. It was the center. I guess it would have been Mike Pouncey that came out in 2009. I ran into him at the Combine, and we kind of shook hands and, kind of knew of each other. And he said, hey, let me ask you something. How do you block Terrence Cody? And I was like, dude, I don't think you do. I think you just go around him, right? I mean, like, you don't actually block Terrence Cody. I mean, he was so explosive. I watched Terrence Cody in Combine prep do a windmill dunk. I mean, at like 365. It was unbelievable. He was so explosive for the size he was, and the key word for him was inertia. Once he got going, you weren't going to stop him, man. He was a terror.
When you were living in Tuscaloosa, where was your favorite place to eat?
Oh, Lord. What's the first of all, we used to go to Nick's in the Sticks a good bit. I'm trying to remember the name of the catfish place that used to be in Northport that ended up being on the corner there on like Hackberry. That was a pretty good spot as well. But man, we were all over the place. Honestly, it didn't matter where we ate at any given time. We used to just tear it up all over time. I mean, like Chinese joint down down off Skyland or Ryan's Buffet. I mean, like we didn't take any prisoners, man. It didn't matter what what it was. We were gonna get after it pretty good, whatever the venue was.
Yeah, buffet and offensive line, they sound like they go together to me. If you didn't go to Alabama, where would you have gone?
I grew up a Florida State fan. I was a big Florida State fan growing up in the Panhandle. Alabama really took a chance on me. Bob Connolly, Mike Shula, they were my first offer, really the first program that even spoke to me. Mickey Andrews, the defensive coordinator for Florida State at the time, showed up at practice to watch me a couple of months later and kind of talked to me. But really the feeling I got from them, I think they only signed 1 offensive lineman in that class, and it wasn't even a possibility. And I didn't court any other programs. After Alabama offered me, I felt so thankful to have that opportunity that I kind of shut down my recruitment. I talked to LSU, I talked to Auburn, talked to Florida here and there, but it was always going to be Alabama after that. But I grew up a Florida State fan for sure.
Mike, last one. When does Alabama win another championship?
You're setting me up. It's 2024, right? I mean, that's the easy answer. No, I can't give you an exact date. I will say this: I think that Kalen DeBoer wins a national title at Alabama, and there's no doubt about that in my mind. I don't know what all it takes in terms of getting all his ducks in a row and getting the pieces in place. They're as talented as anybody right now. I think he'll keep that up, and I think this era of college football is built for Kalen DeBoer at Alabama. I think it's just different than it ever has been. Offenses are wide open. You do things differently in terms of roster building and general managers and portal and NIL. I think he's suited for this, and I think that Kalen DeBoer wins one. Let's call it the next 3 or 4 years, if not this year. There you go.
Amazing stuff. Mike Johnson, you're one of the best to ever wear crimson and white. This is All-American, national champion. Mike, we really appreciate it. Thanks so much for doing this.
Anytime, buddy.
Hey, welcome back to Beat Everyone. I'm here with producer Matt Scalisi now, and we're going to try to do something a little different. Some blind rankings, Alabama football edition. And I want to give a quick shout out to the Makeshift Project. They may have stolen it from somebody else for all I know, but they are where I see it all the time. They do an awesome job with this. And so, Matt, you and I are going to give each other a couple of blind ranking topics. And so it's up to us to figure out and make the best possible ranking with what each other gives the other. So you're going to go first here, okay? And this is going to be harder than you think it is. So be on your toes here. So
yeah, bring it on.
Okay, so I want you to rank these Alabama starting quarterbacks from the Nick Saban era without knowing who comes next. Are you ready for this?
Yeah, let's go.
Okay, first one. And this is top 5, okay? I should stress, top 5. A.J. McCarron.
Boy, it's tough without knowing who's on the list. I think it's relatively safe to put AJ at 3 here. Yeah, very accomplished, but definitely preceded some more talented, more accomplished guys.
3, okay. I mean, he's like, what, Alabama's winningest quarterback of all time, and you're just going to put him at 3? Okay, makes sense, I guess. Couple of national championships.
Look, I'm not knocking AJ, but there's been guys with very obviously recognizable, stronger talent than him, but maybe they're not on the list. I don't know.
Okay, next up, Blake Sims.
Ooh, love that. Blake Sims is super unheralded because he didn't get the title, but incredibly talented, arguably changed the way offense is played at Alabama and the way what fans expect out of an offense at Alabama. Man, I got to go 4 for Blake because he didn't get the title, but very, very good quarterback and underrated.
Okay, interesting pick. You don't know who's coming next. But Blake Sims, awesome quarterback. I mean, all these guys are, listen, you know who played quarterback under Nick Saban, started a quarterback under Nick Saban for the last 17 years. Okay, so next on the list, Tua Tagovailoa.
Yeah. So, Tua's either 1 or 2. I'm going to go 1 for Tua because I think he is responsible for the single most spectacular play by a quarterback in Alabama football history, maybe in college football history. I'll put him number 1.
Okay, next on the list, Cooper Bateman.
Knew it was coming. Held the 5 spot for Cooper. Sorry, buddy. I believed in you. I wanted it to work, but you had your shot, and boy, did it not go well. So Cooper's got to go at 5.
Hey, listen, I think Cooper Bateman is one of the biggest what-ifs in Alabama history, and maybe that was his shot. Maybe that's what happened, right? And it was for the best long term.
I did cover Cooper as a recruit, and he was a very talented guy. Just, timing wasn't great. He got his one shot in a game where there was some Hugh Freeze voodoo hex in the building.
All right, well, you got one more spot left and one more quarterback. The last one, this guy's been in the news, Bryce Young.
Yeah, okay. I feel good about putting Bryce at number 2, actually. He did not win a title as the starting quarterback, but he is Alabama's only Heisman-winning quarterback, and I think well-deserved. I think played with some disadvantages that a lot of the other Alabama quarterbacks did not have. I don't think that Bryce had maybe the offensive line protection that a lot of his comrades had at quarterback for Alabama. But, spectacular player, put the team on his back and had them in contention every single year that he was there.
All right. Well, I think you may have nailed this, Matt.
I feel good about it.
totally honest with you. So what, you have Tua number 1, Bryce Young number 2, A.J. McCarron number 3, Blake Sims number 4, and Cooper Bateman number 5. You were smart to reserve that 5th spot.
And I'm glad you didn't put Mac Jones in this category, because that would have been a very complicated decision to make. But yes, well, Ben, I went tough for you too with your category, and I am going. I'll even give you a heads up to say you're going to be ranking Saban era wide receivers, but these are all what I would call unheralded wide receivers, perhaps guys who were among the leaders on the team in receptions, but do not get the hype that maybe the top line guys do. Okay. So your first name, Jameson Williams.
Man, Jameson Williams is super underrated even now. He's only a couple of years removed from the program, but the guy had 1,300, I may be underestimating this, yards receiving. He had double-digit touchdowns, I think.
Starting to blow up in Detroit now.
He didn't win the Biletnikoff award. He probably should have. Jameson Williams, I think you're going to give me somebody a little bit better and that is a little more beloved in Alabama football lore. But in terms of production, I don't know how I can't go lower than 2 for Jameson Williams.
Strong. That's a strong pick. All right.
I can't.
Your next name, Jalen Waddle.
Number 1. Jalen Waddle's number 1 for me. Jalen Waddle, he's one of my top 5 players maybe ever watching Alabama football. And with production, he didn't have the numbers that somebody like Jameson Williams had. But anytime the man touched the ball, he was a threat to score. Whether he was catching it, whether he was returning a punt, returning a kick, whatever. If Jalen Waddle got his hands on the ball, he may score. And I think per capita, the guy is one of the most talented players Alabama has ever had. And the weirdest thing about Jalen Waddle, we never even saw the best of him. We only scratched the surface of what Jalen Waddle could do with a football and as a player because of injuries that he had. But man, what a competitor, what an electrifying player. And for me, Jalen Waddle gets the number 1 spot in terms of unheralded wide receivers. I mean, he's as heralded as an unheralded receiver can get.
Honestly, one of the top plays of the 2020 season, which is full of incredible moments, was Jalen Waddle catching the little crossing route in the national title game on basically one leg.
Yeah,
great moment. All right, number 3. So you've already got your 1 and 2 set.
I do, and I feel fine about it, no matter who you give me.
Number 3, Ardarius Stewart.
Ooh, Ardarius Stewart, very good player.
One of the leading, I believe he actually was the leading receiver on the 2015 squad.
Yeah, he was an outstanding player, one of the best blocking wide receivers, I think, of the Saban era. Toughness exemplified, right? I mean, the guy got injured and walks back onto the sideline holding an axe to intimidate the opposite sideline. So that gave you an idea of who Ardarius Stewart was. In terms of being a number 1 guy or even a number 2 guy, I think you gotta kind of put Ardarius Stewart towards the bottom of the list. He had a couple of years in the NFL, but didn't really pan out long term, but had a great Alabama career. I don't think I can go any higher than 4 or 5 with him with this list. I feel comfortable. If we're talking unheralded, though, I feel bad about this. I'm going to go 5, Ardarius Stewart.
It's a calculated risk there with your list. All right. Next one, Kevin Norwood.
Oh, Kevin Norwood, Mr. Clutch, right? He has a clutch reputation, known primarily for big games against LSU, obviously in 2011 when he's catching these deep passes from A.J. McCarron over Tyrann Mathieu, the Honey Badger, to help ensure Alabama's win in a national championship game. And then obviously another go-to receiver on that legendary drive A.J. McCarron led in 2012 when they went to LSU in Death Valley. I was in the building, so were you, watching that game in person, and he catches one first down after the other. If we're talking unheralded and that's the name of the game here, I'm going to put Kevin Norwood at number 3 because he is probably the king of the word unheralded of the Saban era, and you could just always count on the guy. Kevin Norwood, legend that not enough people talk about.
Well, Ben, you've made it real easy for yourself on the last one, but I'll let you talk about him anyway. Your number 4 guy on your list is John Mechie.
Ooh, John Mechie. Okay, I feel okay about this. I mean, from a production standpoint, John Mechie was obviously more productive than Kevin Norwood, right? And John Mechie was a clutch player too. I mean, you go back to that 2021 Iron Bowl, he catches the winning 2-point conversion that closes out what was a nail-biter of a game that Alabama should have never been in the first place. But John Mechie was also a number 1, number 2 borderline receiver in the Bryce Young era, right? And 2021 is just one of those years you look back and think, man, what could have been, right, if John Mechie hadn't been hurt for those last couple of games. If John Mechie isn't hurt, and obviously if my number 2 pick, Jameson Williams, isn't hurt, does Alabama win a national championship? I think you can make a case for it, but that's woulda, coulda, shoulda. We're getting into if Colt hadn't gotten hurt territory, and we don't want to be there.
And you gotta throw some bonus points in there for, look, I know we don't speak his name anymore, but Isaiah Bond is in this category, Roy Upchurch is in this category, but John Mechie has a game-winning reception against Auburn, which is pretty much cements you in the lore forever at Alabama.
Well, and John Mechie, also a legend for knocking the hell out of a Florida player after Mac Jones had a pass tipped and they had an interception in the SEC championship game. And had that been the only play he ever made as an Alabama player, he would have been worthy of a Daniel Moore painting. Yeah. So, and he stepped up too. When Jalen Waddle went down in 2020 with that ankle injury, and he obviously came back like you mentioned before, John Mechie stepped up as the number 2 receiver, obviously in the huge shadow of Devontae Smith, but he made a number of huge plays that season and was a big reason Alabama were national champions in 2020. So I feel good about this list.
I do too. I think you did a good job. I think you nailed it there.
All right, maybe it's not perfect, but I think both of us are strong out of the gate with these blind drafts. So, yeah, again, shout out to the Makeshift Project. Really cool idea, and we're going to be doing more of this for Alabama football. There are a lot of different directions that we can take with it. So, Matt, thanks for doing this, man.
Yeah, of course, Ben.
All right, find Beat Everyone on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. He's Matt Scalisi. I'm Ben Flanagan, and we'll see you next time. Beat Everyone is brought to you by Broadway Joe's Fantasy Sports, inspired by football legend Joe Namath. Embrace the thrill of daily fantasy sports like never before in a new app coming soon.